Welcome back to Communicology. Today I'd like to get into a topic we've talked about before, and that's rhetoric. Why? Because, well, I find it quite interesting, and because, like I said in my other video about rhetoric, we use it every day, so it's kind of interesting to dig into it. Now, one thing I talked about in a previous message is the idea that some people abuse the word by saying, oh, that's just rhetoric. So when you hear people spewing nonsense or trying to spin their way through things, especially with politicians, we a lot of times just say, oh, that's just rhetoric. And I say, no, that's not. In fact, that's sophistry. It's like, sophistry, here's another word. What does that even mean? And again, it's one of those things that you have to go all the way back into ancient Greece to see all the different players that are involved and how they wrestled with the idea of sophistry. So what we're going to do is, today we're going to focus on two different players in that space. And the first one is Gorgias on the side of the Sophists and Plato on the side of the rhetors or the rhetoricians. So we'll look at those two and talk about the difference. Now, sophistry is a little bit of a misnomer, and it's also one of those things that's a little bit kind of hard to figure out because, quite frankly, some of the early sophists we don't have a lot of information about because their writing just hasn't survived much. And most of what we know about the sophists, we actually get from Plato. So there's a little bit of confusion that could be put in here because Plato hated the sophists. So what we understand about the sophists is coming from someone who hated them. So that's going to create a little bit of a challenge. But again, it's one of those things that for what we do have that survived, we can see why Plato had the mindset that he did towards those folks. So to understand these terms, let's dig into, again, what they mean and what they look like. So we already defined rhetoric, and that's the faculty of observing, and in any given case, the available means of persuasion. So again, what do I have available to me? How can I observe things that in this given moment, how can I persuade somebody? Well, persuasion's not a bad thing, and that's okay because we do it all the time, and people try to do it to us all the time. So what's sophistry then? I mean, you're familiar with the term sophisticated, and they have the same root, and that's Sophia, which is wisdom. So you're thinking, well, what's wrong with wisdom? Inherently, nothing. It's just when it comes down to understanding sophists, it's a question of what they used in their arsenals to try to, perhaps trick people or try to convince them of something other than what they should know or believe. And that's where we get into the problem with sophists. So let's talk about Gorgias a little bit. And one thing that he really recognized is that experiences are limited by human senses. So whenever you're going to speak, whenever you're going to try to, convince people of things, you have to realize that anything that we have, we're kind of stuck with how we can observe things. Now, when it comes down to the oral word, which again, you're going back to this time of ancient Greece where it's a lot of it's in the oral tradition, it's how can I speak in such a way to get you to, maybe believe what I want you to believe. So I'm trying to persuade you. I've got my voice and I've got my appearance. Those are the things that come into play. I can use my voice in a certain kind of way to, get you to believe a certain way, or I can be angry at times. I can be passionate at other times. I can be coy at other times. I can be cheeky at other times. I can be happy. I can be sarcastic. I can use my voice in a bunch of different ways to try to convince you to do things. I can pause to add that extra emphasis, or I can speak really, really fast to show some kind of passion to it. Again, I can use and manipulate my voice to appeal to the senses you have of your auditory, functionality. So that's available. Also, my appearance matters. So how I carry myself, like perhaps how I dress. I can dress in such a way that delivers a certain message to you. I could, try to trick you to think that I'm more professional than I am, or that I'm more laid back than I am, or whatever I'm trying to do. I can fit that occasion and dress the way I want to try to get you to think of me in a certain way. And that's the whole idea of our senses. Now, also in a modern sense, not as much, although to some extent there was some, Like the idea for close enough, I could use some type of colognes or things like that I can try to persuade you a certain way because now you can smell me. And so we have sense of smell, we have sense of sight, we have sense of hearing. So those are ways. And of course, we can also add in touch too, because I could shake your hand. I could give you a fist bump or high five or some other thing, some other way to convey some type of message to you to get you to believe what I'm trying to say. So when we're talking about experience, that's a very important aspect of the communicative process. And the thing that Gorgias is wrestling with too is, how we're limited by our human senses, because you think of how you experience things, and when you do something, it's your brain that's really slogging through and grappling with things. I mean, yes, you have these tactile or visual or auditory issues coming in play to experience something, and your brain has to wrestle with that, and it's through this imperfect form. Whereas if you're experiencing something on your own, typically, you don't have this mediator or someone else trying to deliver that message to you. It's just directly happening to you, and it's much more immediate. So that's it. And then you see that when another thing he said that's important to understand is the idea that language arises from external things impinging upon us. So again, I am trying to explain something, how I feel. Well, how do I do that? I need words. Well, how do you feel? I mean, it's amazing when you start thinking about it, like, what do you mean? Of course, we just talk about it. But have you ever had times when someone has said, how do you feel about a certain thing, and you're struggling to find the right words? Like, what does that mean? I mean, like, well, that means the words, we're limited. Language really limits us because you just want to be like, well, that, yeah, and you just kind of blur it out because you can't come up with those right words to say exactly how you feel. And that's usually also another problem we have with translations from language to language. There are lots of good words in other languages that we don't have an English version of. So we need to come up with some other way to fish our way through to come up to give you a basic idea of maybe what we're talking about. So that's a limitation that we have is our human senses limit us. And then, of course, language we see as a limitation as well. But at the end of the day, it is what we have, and we have to use it to carry meaning as best we can. And Gorgias also says that we are moved to speak by sensory experiences. When you have some kind of sensory experience, whether it's putting your hand on a burner and, you feel the sense of getting burned, or it could be the sense of something, like the sun hitting your face in the morning, and you feel that warmth bathe over you, whatever the thing is, maybe you just had this really nice first kiss with after that first date. Yeehaw. You have all these words at your disposal, and boy, you want to share them. Very rarely do you experience something really cool and really neat or really bad and just say, I'm just not going to talk about it. At the very least, we exclaim something, like put your hand on a burner. We very rarely do we stay silent. We yell something, and who knows what kind of other things come out of your mouth whenever you experience whatever, good, bad, doesn't matter. But we want to share those things. So on one hand, we are limited by language, but on the other hand, like I said, it's what we have. So, but you want to use it because I've experienced something and I want to pass it on. And he also says that language is powerful and worthy of intense study. That's an important thing to think about when it comes to Gorgias and understanding that. So you can see, again, sophistry with meaning wisdom, So someone who is wise, you can see, I want to use my wisdom and try to understand and share and discuss experience. So far, so good. So this is the kind thing. And where we start seeing the turn with him is where we start seeing his one quote, and that is, speech is a powerful lord. That's pretty bold, that speech is a powerful lord. So you think of the idea of not just the language itself carrying meaning, but the person using it. If I can control speech, I can control the moment. You can see where this turn can get a little bit fuzzy all of a sudden. Because yay, we're with you, we're learning, yay, experience, yay, all these senses and discussion and coming up with language, yay. Oh, now we're using it to be a powerful lord. Okay, and that's a bit of a dark turn all of a sudden. Well, you can see now where Plato starts to have an issue, because again, and this is nothing new. This is something people have talked about ever since, Gorgias, 400 or so BC, going way back. People have talked about often, if you can control the speech, if you can control the language, if you can control communication, you can control people, you can control civilizations, you can control destinies just by controlling the communication. So you can see where all of a sudden that might make somebody a little uneasy thinking about that way, because now you start feeling the weight of the responsibility of having language. Because having language, again, it's good. If you want to have communication, if we want to talk with each other, it's good. And like we talked about last time with persuasion and rhetoric, persuasion is okay. It's not a bad thing. People are trying to persuade you. You're trying to persuade them. That happens every day. It's not a big deal. But the idea of me being powerful, of me being a lord, that gets your attention pretty quick. So basically, we get this idea of how does the human body, mind, and soul respond to the sounds and action and speech. I mean, what it's like to hear certain words. You know what it's like to hear certain phrases. You know how that affects you. Your mind, your feeling, how it makes your heart sing, or how it makes your heart angry. It's just one of those things that, like, in this morning's Bible devotional I was reading this morning about, the shepherds finding out about Jesus' birth, and they came and they brought their gifts, and they were just questioning the whole thing and saying all kinds of wonderful things that they had heard. And it said Mary, pondered, and some translations treasured those things in her heart. So it's just, they're just words, but she understood the weight and the impact of them and treasured them in her heart. You know what that's like for you. There are certain things that are said to you that you hold on to and you treasure them, or maybe they get you really angry or whatever. Also, the flip side of that too is the person who's doing the utterance. If you have a really good friend, you tend to take their words a lot better than if someone who's not a friend, or someone that you're mad at, and you hear them talking and you instantly turn your mind to them in a negative way. So again, we act and react to speech. That's not in dispute. Now, the problem with the sophists is a lot of times they would often at a cost, they would hire themselves out to deliver speeches. Okay, so a public speaker for a fee, no big deal there. But a lot of times it was to play on how the human body would react to things. So imagine if we want to storm the castle. Not too many people want to storm the castle, That's a good way to get killed. Well, you would bring in a sophist to get people riled up, to get the pitchforks out, to get the torches out. And you would play on those emotions. You would know the words to say, the way to carry yourself, the way to speak those words to get people all riled up. And you could see why someone who very much was against that kind of concept of abusing language, using it as a powerful lord, would be upset with that. That's where you end up coming in with Plato. So let's move towards Plato and see how he understands and thinks of rhetoric and sophistry, most importantly. So sophistry, or what he said, sophistic rhetoric, is powerful and deceitful, and it's used to benefit the speaker. So in other words, how can I make myself as speaker look better? I'm not worried about imparting truth or wisdom to you. It's how do I make myself look better? So I want to be known as a grand orator, a great speaker. So how do I make myself a great speaker? Well, I add a lot of flourish, and I maybe use bigger words, and I do whatever it takes to get you to swoon over my speeches. So you can see Plato instantly critiquing here. He says that good rhetoric does not generate truth by itself, but it's an absolutely necessary pathway to truth. Again, Plato likes the idea of wisdom. He doesn't have a problem with wisdom. But for him, what's more important than just getting people to believe one thing or another, it's to get to truth. So you get in when you start getting to like people like Plato and Aristotle, you start moving into the world of philosophers. Again, you have to take the word of, take philosophy, and you have, the love of, phileo, that's, philosophy, so that's the love of, and, Sophy, as Sophia, who we are again, so sophistry, we also carrying into, philosophy, so we have the love of wisdom. So if people who love wisdom, the philosophers, they're more interested in enlightenment. So how can I truly, become a smarter, better person? And if I'm trying to persuade you, you're trying to persuade me, we're both engaging in dialogue and persuasion, trying to get to truth. So there's your big difference between your sophists and your philosophers. The philosophers are looking for that enlightenment, of that growth, that understanding truth. So, like I said with Plato, that good rhetoric does not generate truth by itself. So rhetoric doesn't create truth. It is necessary to get to truth. He called it an absolutely necessary pathway to truth. So if I want to get to truth, I need rhetoric, because that's how I get there for Plato. And he says that to convey truth in rhetoric's, to convey truth in a rhetoric's possession, it's important to do this to ignorant audiences by any effective means, basically keeping the audience's best interest at heart. So when I say an ignorant audience, I don't mean like stupid. I mean ignorant as in they just don't know. So when you look at how I convey this to, I have knowledge, and I need to convey this to an unknowing. I've got knowledge, they're unknowing. So I get to this unknowing audience, and I have to use any effective means. So again, going back to Aristotle's definition, in every given case, the available means of persuasion. So again, the same kind of basic concept here. So keeping the audience's best interest at heart. So again, this is a difference. So when you start getting into the idea of philosophy and truth, again, I'm not focusing on me and my abilities. I'm more interested in delivering truth. So the truth is the important thing that I'm delivering, not my abilities. So again, we're starting to see this more clear distinction between giving a good speech versus giving good information in a speech. You follow the difference there. So we have this push for Plato that to care for the audience, to have that goodwill. This is in the Greek, it'd be eunoia, that I would have this goodwill towards my audience. So you'd have a rhet, which is virtue. So I'd be a virtuous person by delivering practical wisdom, which is phronesis, in caring of my audience, which is eunoia. So I would have those aspects of being an ethical speaker. And you can see the difference between these two now. So how am I giving these speeches? Now, why do I talk about this? Again, this is ancient Greece, 300, 400 BC. Why do I care? Well, you can see this kind of stuff happen today. Look at any politician on a political rally. What are they doing? Are they doing sophistry, or are they doing, enlightenment through philosophy? I mean, it's all about the delivery. It's all about getting the people riled up. You look at false preachers, and what do? They get people. They tell people what their itching ears want to hear. That's out of Scripture. The idea of people who seek out what their itching ears want to hear. False preachers know this, so they'll deliver this false things to get you to part with your money so they can buy a private jet or whatever they do. Yes, and same thing kind of with motivational speakers. They come in, they get people all worked up and riled up and motivated to do the thing, and then move on. Now, what's the problem with sophistic speaking? Well, the problem is that your brain eventually gets engaged. So you get me all worked up and all passionate to go out and vote, or to give money to the false prophet, or to do the thing that the motivational speaker wants. But then the speaker leaves, and you come off that high of that emotion, that roller coaster you've been put on, and you start thinking, and your brain starts working, and logic and reasoning starts to come into play, and you start going, wait a minute. That's the problem that people who are motivational speakers or false prophets or politicians that they have to keep you perpetually worked up. In today's world of social media, we talk about the idea of the outrage machine, and we hear that like this, the idea that you have to be perpetually outraged about something. Well, why do you think people are perpetually outraged? Because they are tuned into, by choice or because the algorithm, they're tuned into the concept of we got to keep you on this edge of emotional beating. That way you stay, absolutely worked up. Because if you sat back and thought about your positions, which sometimes you'll see that. You'll see the man on the street interviews where they'll have somebody go up to a protester and say, what are you protesting? Well, we're protesting this thing. Why? Because it's so unfair. Well, what do you know about it? And they don't know. They just know to get upset and to be mad and to stay mad, but they don't know why they're protesting. It's like, that's a perfect example of someone who's been whipped up into shape by a sophist. They don't know why they're there, but boy, are they worked up about it. So that's why we kind of pay attention to these things, why we care about sophistry versus philosophy, and why you can see why, Plato hated it. Because, again, if I care about you as a person, if I want you to get wisdom, to understand and seek truth, if you're whipped up into a frenzy, you're not going to be too interested in truth. You're going to be interested in being on the right side of the issue, rawr. So how do we fix that? Well, we start demanding better of ourselves as speakers first, but also of people who are speaking to us. Like, stop doing that. Give me some meat. Give me some truth. Give me something I can work with. Let's engage with ideas. Don't just throw out sound bites at me. Don't throw out like emotional things at me. Talk to me. And let's engage in information in a smart and wise way. And maybe we can come up to truth. Maybe we can figure that out. But most sophists don't want that. They want you worked up because they need you worked up to get their thing across. And frankly, some people do it because they don't know any other way. They've never been taught to sit back and actually, be civil and have a conversation and wrestle with ideas. It's worth it to wrestle with the ideas. So that's something I want you to think about today. The next time you hear somebody giving some kind of a speech or tickling your ears a little bit, put on the brakes and listen and say, I know what you're doing now. I can see what you're doing. And be prepared to wrestle a little bit. That's what I have for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. I thank you for tuning in this long anyway. But I'll see you next time on Communicology.